This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Heather Sells. After a frantic overnight search, authorities in Texas found an 8-year-old girl who was abducted in broad daylight. Surveillance video shows the moment the girl is ripped from her mother's arms. Mark Martin joins us now in the CBN newsroom with more. Mark.
The heroic efforts of 2 pastors, Heather, led to the rescue of Salem Sabatka. The girl and her mother were taking a walk when authorities say a man grabbed Salem and pulled her into his car. Salem's mother jumped in the car and tried to fight the abductor, but was pushed out of the vehicle. Listen to this chilling surveillance video after the abduction. Now, surveillance video also captures the moment Salem is torn from her mother's arms. Police say on Saturday evening, 51-year-old Michael Webb allegedly pulls up beside the two and abducts the girl. Authorities issued an Amber Alert and spread the word on social media. 12 hours later, 2 pastors voluntarily went to look for Salem and found the man's vehicle in a hotel parking lot about 10 miles from where she was taken. Jeff King is a local pastor and friend of Salem's dad.
I mean, God makes miracles happen all the time. We got out here and tried to make a difference.
And they did. King says the community pulled together to help in the search. Authorities say when Salem was found, she was calm. She was taken to the hospital and does not appear to have any serious injuries. Prosecutors charged Webb with aggravated kidnapping, and he is currently being held on $100,000 bond. Heather, back to you.
All right, Mark, thanks very much. A new chapter has begun for First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Its new sanctuary was unveiled on Sunday, and this nearly a year and a half after a gunman opened fire and killed more than 24 people in church in the deadliest mass shooting in state history. The church commemorated the victims on Sunday by reading their names as the church bell rang. Those connected to the victims in the crowd stood up. The new worship center and memorial room honoring the victims was made possible through millions of dollars in donations from people around the world. Hundreds of abortion activists took to the streets Sunday in Alabama to protest the state's newly approved abortion ban. The protest came days after Alabama's governor signed the strictest abortion law in the nation. The demonstrators marched to the Alabama Capitol chanting, "My body, my choice," and vote them out. Over the weekend, President Trump took to Twitter to tout his pro-life victories. But he did say he supports abortion in the case of rape and incest, which the Alabama law provides no exception for. "I am strongly pro-life with 3 exceptions," Trump tweeted: rape, incest, and protecting the life of the mother, the same position taken by Ronald Reagan. Some pro-life advocate laws think the law will initiate a battle to overturn Roe v. Wade at the Supreme Court. Well, on Friday, the House passed the controversial Equality Act. Democrats say it protects LGBTQ Americans, and Republicans say it is misleading and filled with what they call poison pills. Abigail Robertson brings us more from Washington.
As Democrats celebrate the first ever passage of the Equality Act in the House, Republicans caution the bill is not quite what people think it is.
We all want everyone to be able to be treated equal, but it really actually changes the very nature of a way most businesses and institutions will conduct themselves were this to become law.
8 Republicans joined every House Democrat in voting for the measure.
There is nothing more central to the idea of America, nothing that has contributed more to the exceptionalism of our country and the prosperity of America than the guarantee of equal protection of the law for every single American.
The bill amends the Civil Rights Act to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity.
We're gravely concerned about spaces like bathrooms, locker rooms, changing rooms, dormitories. We're concerned about the material consequences of eradicating the category female from the law.
Kara Dansky, a Democrat, feminist, and LGBTQ advocate, tells CBN News she's strongly opposed to the legislation.
If the bill is permitted to go through, it would redefine the word sex to mean gender identity, and that has grave consequences for women and girls.
Conservatives fear the bill violates parental rights.
The son can actually go to a doctor without the parents' involvement at all, even if the parents object vocally. Under this bill, the doctor has to treat the boy to ultimately transfer over to be a female.
Allowing young children to make life-altering sex change decisions.
In Ohio, there was a parents that had their parental rights taken away from them because they refused to go along with giving hormone treatments to their teenage child.
And it punishes doctors who object too.
We've had other states that have sued hospitals who have, their faith-based hospitals, who have not gone along with doing a sex change operation on a child, and they're being sued for discrimination.
Congresswoman Hartzler, a former track coach, worries about female athletes now competing against biological men.
It's going to be detrimental to women's sports.
And thinks it'll mean the end of religious liberty cases winning in the court. It's not likely Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell will bring it to the floor this session. And even if it were to pass both chambers, the White House has already indicated the president will not sign it. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Well, even though it's unlikely the Equality Act will go anywhere in the Senate, it is significant in that it shows the direction of the Democratic Party. And what caught our attention is an op-ed piece in USA Today by Brad Palumbo. He is a gay conservative who says the Equality Act would crush religious freedom. Palumbo is a USA Today contributor and an editor at Young Voices. He joins us with more now. Brad, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
It seems that most gay rights advocates support the Equality Act, but you think it goes too far. Tell us about your concern.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it is true that the mainstream kind of LGBT activist community, which skews progressive, is fully behind this bill. But a lot of more level-headed gay rights advocates like myself recognize that a bill that erases the rights of religious liberty of conservative and religious Americans is not what tolerance and not what equality actually looks like.
You are advocating something called the, quote, fairness for all approach, which aims to protect, as I understand it, civil rights for LGBTQ people, but also protect those with traditional beliefs on sexuality. Talk more about how this approach would work.
Absolutely. So this approach was put out by a Council for Religious Freedom, and the point of it is to fill in the gaps in an existing law, which would strengthen anti-discrimination protections for sexual orientation and for gender. And I mean, in my opinion, how I see it, there's no reason that a random secular grocery store should be able to fire someone for being gay, or a doctor shouldn't be able to refuse to vaccinate a person who happens to be transgender. But that's different than having an expansive, comprehensive law that would force doctors to perform medical surgeries, gender transition surgeries against their will, that would violate their conscious rights, or a law that defines public accommodations so loosely that it would force Catholic schools to hire people who are not living according to the Catholic faith, and so on. So I think that you can have a law, you can have an approach that bolsters anti-discrimination laws, but doesn't trample over the rights of religious Americans.
At this point in time, how much momentum would you say that this approach has? We're not hearing a lot about it.
Well, it has very little momentum, unfortunately, because I think you see with probably, I'd say, about 80% of people in the LGBT community, they've still kind of fallen under this progressive sway where they're not really pursuing tolerance, because tolerance is a two-way street. What they're pursuing is it's our turn now, and they're looking to impose their views, to impose their outcome onto others. And I think ultimately that's going to be self-defeating. So this approach isn't getting a lot of attention, but if you ask me, it should be.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that there is this fairness for all approach and the concern about balancing rights. And then there's also feminists, as you saw or heard in the earlier piece, who are opposing the Equality Act. Right now, it doesn't appear that it is going to win in the Senate. But I'm just wondering what you're hearing. What kind of attention do you think it might get in the Senate at this point in time?
Well, I don't think it will come up for a vote in the Senate, although there are actually a few Republicans like Susan Collins who are on board with it. But what I want to point out is that the Trump administration, even if it were to pass, would veto it. And I think it's important to look at what they said. You know, a senior Trump administration official was quoted by the Washington Blade, which broke this scoop, saying that President Trump would veto the bill. But when you look at his statement, right, because people are going to scream, oh, Trump is homophobic and all this, when you look at their statement, they say very clearly, they don't want anyone to be discriminated against. They want the law to protect everyone, but that has to include pathways for religious liberty. So that's why the Trump administration would oppose this bill, even if it were to get out of the Senate. And I think they'd be right to do so.
Very interesting politics here. Brad Palumbo, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Well, over the weekend, the Jerusalem studio of Daystar, one of the largest Christian networks in the world, was firebombed. As Chris Mitchell reports, although the attack destroyed its new studio, the network does plan to rebuild.
The fire began early Saturday morning when an arsonist started a fire in the Daystar studio. Daystar was in the midst of a major renovation and upgrade of its studio here in Jerusalem, overlooking Mount Zion and the Temple Mount. The fire destroyed the new work and much of the existing facility.
The control room is, I'd say, probably totally devastated.
Dave Charette, the general contractor overseeing the renovations, showed us the destruction.
This is where we filmed from. There were 4 cameras that would be back in this area here, and Marcus and Joni would be, or their interviewee would be sitting here, and then you have this fabulous view behind them.
Yeah. These before and after shots reveal the extent of the devastation.
We're here in the new Daystar TV studios in Jerusalem, Israel.
Marcus and Joni Lamb dedicated the Daystar Jerusalem studio in March of 2011. Daystar is one of the largest Christian television networks in the world that reaches more than 200 countries and nearly 700 million people with its programs. Daystar was in the home stretch of its Jerusalem construction.
We just started with the construction of it, putting things back, getting the electric in place, and getting the walls built, and so we can meet our June 1st deadline, and then this happened.
Even in the midst of the destruction, Charette believes God is at work.
I believe that God has a reason and a purpose, and at the very least, He'll redeem what has happened here. So these ashes will be raised up, and proclaim the glory of God.
Daystar pledges to continue their Jerusalem operations and asks for prayer for continued protection. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, how one group of evangelical leaders is working to help the humanitarian crisis at the U.S. border.
People want to know, is there a plan and how do you find it?
CBN presents The Plan. 8 keys for understanding God's will for your life.
We're going to talk about God's plan for your life.
Is there a plan for everyone's life?
In Pat Robertson's latest teaching, you'll discover the secret to knowing and living out God's unique purpose for you.
The plan of God will be unfolded in your life in ways you couldn't believe possible.
In The Plan, Pat reveals the principles to understanding God's will so that you will be filled with peace, provision, joy, and satisfaction. Plus, see amazing stories of how others are living out their individual purpose intended by God.
God is faithful, and we did what He told us to do.
Live the life God has designed for you.
I hope that God works out a plan in you that will bring blessing, joy, peace, and happiness.
Get the plan. Call 1-800-700-7000 or visit CBN.com.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Welcome to Superbook Academy. An exciting online Sunday school curriculum jam-packed with Bible courses kids will love.
Awesome! Amazing!
Go to superbookacademy.com to order your curriculum today.
So many immigrants are flooding the border in southwest Texas right now that Border Patrol says it will begin to fly hundreds of families from the Rio Grande Valley to San Diego. Officials say that even though flights cost $6,000 and up, they are maxed out at their facilities in Texas and need a place to process these people. A group of pastors, including Paula White and some of the president's other faith advisors, are meeting at the border in El Paso this week to learn more about the humanitarian crisis and how churches and ministries can serve. They want to help both immigrants and the families of Border Patrol agents. Joining us now is Pastor Todd Lampier of New Destiny Christian Center outside of Orlando, who is leading the group. Pastor Todd, thanks for joining us.
Heather, thank you for inviting me.
You and Pastor Paula White have started a campaign you're calling Operation Border Blessing to meet some of the needs at the border. Tell us what you're seeing right now with immigrants coming over.
Well, you know, Heather, the president is absolutely correct to call this a humanitarian crisis. Our laws are broken and outdated, and we're just seeing so many. I mean, the numbers are staggering. 520,000 apprehensions on the border since October 1, 100,000 in the last 2 months, 4,500 daily apprehensions this last week alone. And what that does is it just creates an overcrowding in the detention facilities. They just can't hold anymore. And so that's where we've come in to assist and come alongside Customs and Border Protection to create welcome zones where churches will be engaged to be places of hope and help and healing for those that ICE drops off.
We'll talk a little bit more about the needs of these immigrants right now in dealing with all of this, what they need, and then also Border Patrol agents, what they and their families are needing.
Yeah. Well, you know, first of all, the immigrants that have come across, they need the basics. They need food, they need shelter, they need showers, but even more than that, they need hope. And this is what our churches are giving them. In the midst of giving them a meal and helping with a ride to the bus station, giving them a shower. Really what they're doing is, more importantly, is that they're giving them hope in Jesus Christ and presenting the gospel to them.
All right, and the Border Patrol agents, it sounds like they are really maxed out, working overtime, and their families are stressed. Talk about how you want to come alongside them.
I've got to tell you, we have the best Border Patrol agents anywhere. These men and women are just extraordinary, Heather. They're not only law enforcement agents, but they also now have to be part-time child care, social workers, medical assistants, bus drivers, on top of being husbands and wives and moms and dads. And just emotionally, they're tapped out. Add to that our society has vilified and demonized these amazing people. We wanted to come alongside them and just say thank you. So we've created the Homeland Security Family Network Appreciation Tour. It's just a way for the silent majority to say a million thank yous for all that you do to keep our country safe.
All right, and we know that churches in El Paso have already been responding, but it sounds like you are hoping to bring more churches in around the country to really support them because the need is so great. Is that correct?
Oh, that's absolutely correct, Heather. Not only in El Paso have churches been engaged, but in McAllen, and that's actually where we'll be this week on the border with pastors, is McAllen to Brownsville to Las Cruces, New Mexico. I mean, you name it, wherever there are stations where they receive immigrants, we have churches that are responding all the way up to San Diego, California. But we need a lot more.
All right. Well, Pastor Todd, thanks for your time and blessings on your work.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Up next, what one expert has to say about tech giants and what he says is a left-leaning bias.
It's about the competition.
I kind of put that pressure on myself, and I think people had expectations.
It's about overcoming.
We use this phrase all the time, keep chopping, keep practicing hard.
It's about going the distance.
You know, I think as a father, it's my job, you know, to lead. Just be the best husband and father I can be.
Watch Going the Distance with Sean Brown Saturday night at 7:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Woohoo! Hi, Superbook fans. Here's something else you'll love. It's the new Superbook Bible app. It's packed with games, activities, and Superbook episodes that you can watch for free. Oh no! There's trivia, a fun daily devotional, and answers to your Bible questions. Plus, an easy-to-understand Bible the whole family will enjoy. You can even create your own Superbook character. Ta-da! Whoa!
No Super Falls, man. Come.
Sorry, pardon me. Sorry, excuse me. Ouch!
Are you getting this?
Earn super points to win daily prizes, too. And so much more! Time to get back to my adventures. See you soon! It's the new Superbook Bible app. Free downloads on iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon.
How can you find God's plan for your life?
CBN presents The Plan, 8 Keys to Understanding God's Will for Your Life. In Pat Robertson's latest teaching, you'll discover the steps to take in following God's plan, how to know for certain when God is leading you, how to get rid of spiritual blindness and see God work.
God said, I've got a plan to give you a future and a hope.
Get The Plan. Call 1-800-700-7000 or visit CBN.com.
Conservative watchdog Dan Gaynor has long argued that big tech giants like Google and Twitter lean to the left, and now he is citing an article published in a leading journalism publication as evidence. The Columbia Journalism Review recently ran an article on a study of the search returns by Google News. And here's a quote from that study. Our data shows that 62.4% of article impressions were from sources rated by that research as left-leaning, whereas 11.3% were from sources rated as right-leaning. Dan Gaynor of Media Research Center joins us now by Skype. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. This is actually a real important story, so I'm happy to be on to talk about it.
Well, yeah, I'm interested. The study listed the most popular news sites that Google searches returned. What were they?
Well, it was the top 20 were all sites that lean to the left, by our definition, except for Fox News, which, is not leaning to the left. And by definition, that was odd. The CNN led the pack, and it had, I think it was 10.9% of all traffic. That was almost equal to the entirety of the conservative news universe that they linked to in the whole study. So I mean, that shows how bad this is. It's basically by a factor of about 5-to-1, liberal to conservative. And, this isn't a conservative publication coming up with this. Columbia Journalism Review is a Soros-funded left-wing operation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, is this really biased, though, or is Google just finding stories from the more popular news sites?
Well, it's definitely biased to more they would probably say establishment news. But, it's definitely biased. When even journalism professors can come out and say, by their definition, it's 5-to-1 more liberal, that's a problem. And that's what we keep running into with these platforms. They set up rules that are liberal. They hire staff who are liberal. The staff give politically to liberal candidates. And then when you appeal it, you have to talk to the liberal staff. And, it's just sort of, we're boxed in on all sides. And what you find is no matter which one of the social media or search media companies you're dealing with, conservatives end up getting the bad end of the stick.
Yeah, it really seems to be entrenched. Of course, some critics say that these results only reflect that most consumers of online news are coming from a leftist perspective. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that's ridiculous. The history, the reason why the news environment online, particularly on social media, is so important to the right is because we would never get a fair break in the traditional media, the Washington Post, New York Times, and the broadcast networks. So conservatives invested a lot of time, a lot of money into being dominant players on Facebook, on Twitter, and YouTube and Google. And so to say, well, there's nothing of yours here, let's just not flat out not true.
Well, I want to ask you, too. Recently, the White House asked social media users to share their stories of being censored online. What is your take on that?
Well, the White House came out with two things last week that were just fantastic. First of all, it refused to sign on to this global censorship compact being led by New Zealand, where they want to control free speech across the globe now in conjunction with the social media companies. And then the White House, to further affirm its way of fighting back against these companies, it asked for everybody to send their stories. And I really strongly urge people, if you're sure you've been, you got silenced, you got suspended for saying something, you got in trouble for, I guess, your Christian faith or saying a pro-life thing, I urge you to fill out the form in the White House, because that they're trying to do is gather enough facts and enough data to say, see, here's a problem. Because a lot of the major media don't think there's a problem because they don't care if conservatives get censored.
Really fascinating times. Dan Gaynor, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, after the break, what the Pope has to say about fake news and how he encouraged hundreds of foreign journalists over the weekend.
As the world watches from the outside,
it's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
Meet the pastors who are preaching the gospel in a fresh, fearless way. I'm Roberto Torres Cedillo. Join me each week for Next Gen Voices. And watch God transform a generation.
Pope Francis is speaking out on journalism. He says it is an important tool to counter hatred, prejudice, and fake news. Speaking to an audience at the Foreign Press Association in Rome, Francis urged correspondents to use the power of the press to seek the truth. He also urged them to use humility in their reporting and warned against hatred. It was the first time the Pope spoke to the Foreign Press Association. The association has been representing hundreds of journalists from more than 50 countries since 1988. And that is it for this edition of NewsWatch. You can find more on the issues that you care about most at cbnnews.com. And you can also watch CBN News programs anytime on our CBN News channel. We would love to know what you think about the stories that you have seen here. So email us at newswatch@cbn.com or reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope that you'll join us next time.